We got quite a few balance changes in last week's patch, ranging from small tweaks to complete overhauls. I've already covered the changes to Strongback and Armor, so this video will be all of the other changes. Starting off, we have Rampage and Juggernaut from Challenger, both of which have received some love. Rampage's required damage to build stacks has been reduced from 400 to 135. Its bonuses to reload speed and movement speed were also increased by 5% each. These buffs help you be more aggressive with Rampage, and build stacks with pretty much any weapon now. Juggernaut now also grants the user a 15% stamina cost reduction. It may seem negligible, but it adds up with other sources to let you spam charge attacks more frequently. Rune Pistol had its mod tweaked to mark enemies in an aura around you instead of a single burst. This is a really nice change, as it allows players to potentially get way more healing drops. Enemies that were just slightly out of your radius can now still be marked as long as they get close enough. Two of the base game mutators also received updates this patch, the first being Battery. Previously, this mutator granted you bonus weak spot damage after landing non-weak spot hits. It has been changed to increase weak spot damage based on spent mod power. Every 400 mod power spent increases your weak spot damage by 20%, up to 60% for 10 seconds. The max level effect increases your crit chance against weak spot hits while at max stacks by 10%. This is way better than the original. Now there are plenty of builds you can throw it in. One that immediately comes to mind is the Seat. The mod has a base cost of 1440. This means activating it will put you at max stacks and boost your weak spot damage by a huge amount, and that's just one example. Awesome change. The next change is to Shield Breaker, which is now called Shielded Strike. The level 10 effect now grants 25% more charge damage based on your current shield. Now it synergizes more with full shield builds. Now on to the Trinkets, the main course if you will. Starting off with the one and only nerf, Bright Steel Ring, which has become Dull Steel Ring. It now only drops you down one dodge threshold. Now this may sound like a huge nerf, but it's important to remember the other tweaks that came in this patch that can help with weight management. Also, since the ring now shifts down your weight class, it actually reduces the stamina penalty, which the old version didn't. This ring is still very powerful, even after the adjustment. Now on to the many buffs. Leto's Amulet has received an additional 15% reduced stamina cost, bringing it to 30%. This makes a huge difference in all matters of performance, and when combined with other sources, you can really spam stamina heavy actions. Twisted Idol got a small 5% total armor buff, a nice small buff. Alchemy Stone had its lifesteal increased from 5% to 6%, a tiny but nice buff. Hopefully they add in a way to apply debuffs to ourselves. I know Gas Giant can apply corrosion, but I want something that lasts permanently. Amber Moonstone had its health threshold increased from 30% to 35%. Another change that may sound weak on paper, but in actuality it's very good. On half health builds, this basically opens up a bit more of your health to receive the ring's benefit. I wouldn't run it on tank builds using heavy armor, but on light and medium setups, it'll provide a nice safety net from debuffs and chip damage. Bisected Ring got a really good buff. Its damage reduction penalty has been reduced from 25% to 15%. This is very good. Maybe a little too good. 15% is a very small downside for unlimited stamina. That penalty can be negated by leveling Bark Skin and equipping a max level damage reduction fragment. Kinda nuts, as even tank builds can run this now. Blessed Ring had its duration doubled. I'm surprised they buffed it this hard. Considering it's when receiving the effects of a relic, you think maybe 5 more seconds would have been fine? Not that I really mind, 30 seconds of 2 bulwark is very nice. Blood Tinged Ring has had its effective range increased from 10 meters to 25 meters. A very nice tweak, as now you can gain the benefit off of bosses and targets that like to keep some distance. Booster Ring has had its values raised from 15 to 25. Now while this is actually a very good buff, I think they should change the wording of the ring effect. It specifically mentions status resistance rather than just elemental resistance. Obviously it still does increase the values in the menu, but some players may not realize it's effectively a 25% elemental damage resistance ring. Other than that, solid change. Hopefully we see some more multi-element fights in the future that give this ring a bit more room to shine. Burden of the Audacious has received some very lovely buffs. Its healing penalty has been reduced from 75% to 50%, and its heal has been increased from 15% to 20%. This is really good. The healing penalty can be cancelled out entirely by leveling Triage. letting you have baseline heals while also getting good chunks of your health back on perfect dodges. Seriously, don't sleep on this ring anymore. Cleansing Stone had its effect radius increased from 7 meters to 20 meters, and its healing effect from 15% to 25%. This makes it an even more effective team tool. The further range and better heals makes it the perfect pocket medic necklace. Conservation Seal had its chance to not consume a relic per stack increased from 3% to 5%. When combined with either necklace with the same effect, you can hit a 60% chance to not consume relics. I loved using this ring before, now it's even better. Even by itself, it's pretty good. Drayan Scavenger Ring, or Sigil as the buff describes it, was supposed to have its heal increased, but at the moment it just applies a healing dot. Oops. Dying Ember had its lifesteal increased from 5% to 6%. A very small buff, but welcome all the same. Every little bit counts when it comes to stacking leech sources. Encrypted Ring, or Loop, had its healing increased from 10% to 20%. This is a super good buff. It's basically 2% health regen per second during the effect. On weapons with cheap mods, or mods with many charges, you can easily max this out, giving you 30 seconds of constant healing. Triage raises this to 3% per second. Definitely try it out, it's insanely good now. Excess Coil had its shield duration increased from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. A small time buff for the ring. If you were already able to spam skills before, it won't make much of a difference. But for everyone else, it's a nice change. Fey Bruiser Ring had its duration increased from 7 seconds to 15 seconds. Another case of an effect's duration being doubled, although for this one I can understand a bit more. 15 seconds of 2 Bulwark is very nice. Fey Shaman Ring had its regen increased from 0.25 to 0.334, or 3.5 as the game says. Now it heals the same amount as Blood Font from the first game. Guardian's Ring had its duration increased from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. Same stuff as the Bruiser Ring, probably intentional so that the two rings can have similar timers. Low Yield Recovery Ring had its healing increased from 5% to 6%, and its duration increased from 5 seconds to 6 seconds. Another small buff. Its sustained healing will be the same, but for a longer period. Both Navigator's Pendants have had their health and stamina values increased by 5. They were already decent picks before for general survivability, but now they're even better. Reaping Stone had its lifesteal increased from 2% to 3%. A slight increase in lifesteal is nice, however there is still an issue where some effects being cleansed don't proc the ring, like Fairy Fire. Gunfire, please fix. Rerouting Cable had its stamina threshold reduced from 25 to 20. This is a sweet buff. Less stamina cost means more shield. What more can you ask for? It's a bit easier to spend stamina now too, since the weight penalties have been increased. Ring of Deflection had its full conversion chance increased from 20% to 35%. While this is a nice buff to the ring, I'm still not fully convinced on its effectiveness. In a Grey Health build, I can kinda see why you would run it over something like Flowing Life, but the existence of the Concoction and Fragment make Grey Health conversion better and consistent. Maybe the ring could just give a flat Grey Health rate on top of the chance, and then the full conversion chance could be brought back down to 20%. Maybe also add an audio cue, that way you know when it procs. Ring of Grace had its healing increased from 10% to 15%. This is going to be a nutty ring in tank builds now. It was already good before, but now it's way better. With Triage maxed out, you heal for 2.25% health per second. Combined with other sources of regen, you can heal a ridiculous amount of health per second. Ring of the Robust had its armor value increased from 15 to 20. For me, this ring has always been a sort of comfort tool. Now it's only 10 points off of the Concoction in terms of armor gain. It won't make or break your build, but it might help you hit certain thresholds you otherwise wouldn't have. Salmoflange had its damage reduction increased from 50% to 60%. I feel like a lot of players might be afraid of running this necklace because of the downside after being hurt. At least that's how I was when I first picked it up. It's a safety net for careful players. If you rarely ever get hit, this amulet can prevent a ton of potential one-shots. 60% damage reduction is insanely strong. However, it is overkill to run on the heavier armors. It's better to run with the lighter ones that wouldn't overflow the 80% cap. Also, the 15% penalty can be easily negated as we've previously mentioned. Seal of the Empress had its stamina penalty reduced from 10 to 5. This is a personal favorite ring of mine, although I don't think it really needed a buff. A 5 stamina penalty is pretty negligible. Like, why have the downside if it's gonna be so minimal? Perhaps the penalty could be changed to something else. Tightly wound coil had its shield amount increased from 10% to 15%. For me, this ring was never about how much shield it granted, rather the fact it granted shield at all. Using single-shot weapons pretty much means you'll always have it active, although in full shield builds, this will be a nice buff. Tomb Dweller's ring got a buff, but it's not working. Gunfire, please fix. And finally, we have Vacuum Seal. Its range was increased from 100% to 150%, and its shield amount from 10% to 15%. They seem to be making a lot of these shield trinkets a minimum of 15% now. Still a pretty decent buff. Wow, that was a lot of changes. What ones were you happy to see? My next video will definitely 100% be the No Archetype video. It's almost done, it just needs a bit more editing. Thanks for watching, take it easy.